Hello everybody. Tonight we are going to be working on the practice exercises in Chapter 3. And we're going to start with Exercise 1, which is to build a calculator web page. So this is going to be kind of like the first of a series of exercises that's based around this calculator. And I will tell you right up front, and if you guys haven't done this yet, when you look at our unit folder in Blackboard, and you scroll down towards the bottom here, as I will do every once in a while, you guys are going to see that I posted the errata for the chapter. What's errata? Right. It's mistakes in the book, basically, that people catch over time, then they report it to the publisher, then the publisher updates it, hopefully on the website, or sometimes fixes the book. But at this point, this book is probably not going to get revised and updated, so these errata are, should be deemed pretty accurate. Now, where it really comes into play here is if you look at what page we are on in the book, we are at page 121. So a good portion of these, are really pertaining to, the lecture, right? So if you try certain exercises from the lecture materials and they don't work, it's because they have mistakes in them, okay? But this is good always to check errata for every textbook that you ever crack the cover on. Always look at the errata, and if you don't see a link in the book for it, you just look up the ISBN number, add the word errata to it, and the publisher should have something out there. But where it does become really pertinent for us is when we start to get to the exercises, and the code in the exercises are slightly wrong. So what happens is we'll get code, and you'll sit there and go, I typed it in right, I don't know why it's not working, and because you're copying the code, you're going to run into these issues. So what I'm hoping here is by a combination of the errata and my previous experience working with this code to help you kind of mitigate some of those problems. So I just want to make you aware of this. When there is significant errata that affects the homework, I put it in the unit folder so that you guys can see it and know. And then sometimes we've discovered over time that you can take something that is wrong and fix it in different ways. So just because we show one fix doesn't mean it's the only way to fix it. And that's often true with code. There's always, like, you can code your way out of lots of different situations if you know which way to go. And if not, then you're on Stack Overflow or something like that looking things up, right? And that's really the mindset you want to be in, folks. That problem-solving mindset is what employers are going to pay you for when you go out to the workplace. I sat today with one of my students and we were working on some advanced PHP assignments, only to realize that our new server runs a different version of PHP than our old server, and the book that we had was written for the old version of PHP. So now we're on a new version of PHP, so guess what happens to all the PHP commands, especially the ones that connect to databases, all changed, right? So we sat there for a while and we finally figured out what the trick was. It was just taking a couple of arguments that we were passing to a function and switching their order. And that made everything work. But you know how long it took us to figure that out? 3 hours, right? And what feels like a frustrating process, it really is exactly what you guys are going to be doing when you're out in the workplace. You will have days where you will spend the whole day working on trying to solve one silly little problem, right? But then when you find it, you've got that in your tool belt, and it's something you can move on into the future with. And it also really shows you that it's a critical skill in this field. If it was just easy to put together, they hire a whole bunch of people, and pay them hardly anything to do it, right? And the whole point that they're going to hire you and pay you big money is because you can sit down and you have the fortitude to do that and not get frustrated. And then realize that you get that reward at the end for making it work. All right, so we're keeping those things in the back of our mind. And did we catch a page number on the first errata? Page 128? That pertains to us. So when we get there, and please note, step 20, I probably have it highlighted in the book too. Just keep that in the back of your head. All right, so go ahead and launch your Visual Studio if you haven't done so already. And we are going to create a brand new project. And I want you to notice the template that's being picked here. We are going to create an ASP.NET empty web application. Okay. No, this is not a .NET class, but the .NET structure of the project gives us some folders that we need to work with. All right, so let's just go ahead and do that. Let's move this over to the second screen. So if you guys have your own copy of the book, you might want to have that open. There'll be times where I will pull it back over, but for the most part, you're going to watch me code. I'm going to close the Start panel here, and then I'm going to go ahead and go to the File, New, and then choose Project. And here's where we need to make some careful choices. Now, those of you already in my .NET class, and there's a number of you here that either have taken .NET already, the first one, or are in it currently, this will be a little bit more familiar to you. But what we're looking for here is for an installed template. So if you watch where my mouse is, and in that class, we focus on C# as the back-end language. It doesn't really matter if you choose C# or VB for what we're doing, because we're not going to use either one of those languages in the project. But if you want to get in the habit of picking one over the other, choose C#. That's the one that Microsoft chooses. So just get in that mindset. So I'm in Visual C#. I'm going to the Web section, and then I'm actually clicking on Website. And then that's the spot where you're going to find empty website. But hold on a second. Is that the same thing? How many of you have done this already? All right. Is that the right choice? It is. Okay. Now, thank you, Microsoft. They changed the names for things with all these different versions. The question? Yeah, when it doesn't work and you can't do the thing you want to do, that's basically the answer, which is a frustrating process. But one thing that you guys should not ignore doing is talking to each other, because you can always ask me questions, but it doesn't hurt to ask your fellow classmates either. And if you guys aren't in the habit of communicating with each other, I would encourage you to try to change that paradigm, because even out in the work world, folks, having a team there to support you, or somebody knows that one little trick that you don't know, can save you a world of headache. So the answer to your question is sometimes you have to find out the hard way, unfortunately. And that happens to me all the time. No, there's no way to check until they're asking you to do something that you can't do.
But you've been delegated in situations where you can't do something.
Yeah, that spells it out pretty quickly, pretty fast, right? All right, let's go ahead and name the project. They want us to call it Web Calculator. They want us to name the solution with the word solution in it. Now, I've already told you I usually don't do that. That's just me. But that's what the author does, so we'll follow along. And they also want us to make sure that we have this create directory for solution checked. Remember, what this will do for your project is it will create a folder inside of a folder. And the folder that's on the inside is where your actual website is. The folder that sits above it, its only job is to hold that folder and the file, the solution file, which is the pointer file to all the project resources. That's the whole purpose of that. Right, so go ahead and click OK, and it'll start to build things out. Should take a moment. The one thing I will tell you about this little project, it's a very classic project in programming, is to build a calculator. And you guys have probably done it in other languages. But here we're going to be doing it on a web page as opposed to doing it in like a GUI programming language or doing it from a command line level. So this is kind of fun. All right, so now that we have our folders pre-created, they want us to go ahead and add a home page. So they want us to go to the root of the project, right-click, and then add a HTML page. So we're going to go to Add, and I'm not seeing HTML page. Well, here it is at the bottom. Could I just click that? Yeah, I sure can. If you're not seeing what you want, though, don't hesitate to go into the full listing. I know I'm a broken record on this, but type in the name of the file, which is default HTML, spelled correctly. All right, and then we have a basic HTML5 web page. Right off the bat, they want us to do the little trick where we right-click on the file and choose Set as Start Page. So go ahead and do that preemptively. All right, we are now on step 10. And in step 10, it says enter web calculator into the title tag. And then in the step 11, it gives us a whole series of HTML form elements that they want us to drop into the page. And I'm going to just copy and paste them directly from my PDF. You guys, of course, must manually type them. No, I'm kidding. You can do the same thing if you want. And I want to talk about something weird that they're doing here. At least I think it's weird, right? Now, I just put a bunch of form elements on a page. What's missing? The form tag. Where the heck is the form tag? They didn't tell us to put it in. So I'm doing as I'm told. Does this mean that these won't work? They will work just fine. The whole reason we use a form tag, and this is kind of an important little tidbit, is to encapsulate the content and logically group it. And then also to enable the capability of the submit button that we put in the form, that when we press that button, it triggers whatever the action is inside the form tag attribute that says action. Whether it's taking you to a different page or launching a script or whatever it happens to be. So right away there's a little bit of an implication here that we're not quite doing it that way. And that is correct. So instead of using a submit button, if I recall correctly, they're having us put in something that triggers a script, guess what, JavaScript, to do the work for us. But we can still use form elements and we can use them external to the form tag. So that's kind of my grand point here. But if you look at what we're doing, we have a couple of text input boxes. Notice that one of them is read-only. So that's going to be where the answer ends up. So when we'll have this text box up on the screen, we'll do our calculations by pressing buttons, and then the result of that will go into that box, and we don't want to be able to click into it and change the answer. That's why it's read-only. Notice how read-only is done. Read-only equals read-only, right? Not read-only true. And it's a bit redundant, but it's one of those things, if you ever go for a certification exam, it's one of those weird ones. They try to trick you. So just be mindful. All right, that was step 11. All right. On step 12, they want us to add a JavaScript file by right-clicking the scripts folder. Now, here is the first clue, Cindy Lou, that I did not choose the right project template. Where's the scripts folder? Right. Okay. Is that a problem? No. What can I do? I can make a scripts folder. Okay. Not a big deal. But it does show you that I actually did pick the wrong template. Because the difference between an empty ASP website and application is the application assumes the scripts folder is present and gives you some different resources. Will that make our stuff break? Absolutely not. So no worries. So either way, it's going to work. What would confuse people, though, is, hey, that folder's not there. I did something wrong. You didn't do anything wrong. You just chose the wrong option. Well, I guess that is wrong. But it's escapable, right? You're not stuck and things are going to work. So we're making a scripts folder, and I am putting a capital S on it because that's what Microsoft likes me to do. And then we're going to right-click that folder and add a JavaScript file. So let's go ahead and do that. They want us to name that calculator library.js. And then you'll see the file be added to the scripts folder. All right. At this point, we're on step number 13, bottom of page 122, and they're asking us to go ahead and launch this into a browser and see what it looks like. I am going to switch myself over to Chrome, And the reason I'm doing that is mostly because it's already launched, so it'll load a little bit faster. All right. And you see what we have here is, as the book indicates, a pretty crude looking calculator interface. But really, it's not that bad. In subsequent chapters, we will start putting styling on this and make it look better. And when we get to that point, if you want to put your own styling into it, I get people that do that. That's absolutely fine. You can get really creative with it if you want. You could even use fonts that look like like an old-fashioned calculator or whatever. It's all up to you. But for now, we are seeing that we do have a basic interface that works, right? We have a bunch of buttons, and we have the 2 text fields. All right, so go ahead and close your browser and/or hit that little stop button within Visual Studio. All right, another thing that they're doing here, and I guess I'll go ahead and relaunch this real quick. You don't have to do this step, but some of you may or may not know this trick. In step number 14, top of page 123, they say, switch back to Visual Studio by pressing Alt-Tab. You guys know that trick? And sometimes when you guys watch me working on screen, I'll often do this, right? And you might be like, oh, how did you do that? And really all this is a really old school Windows trick. You hold down that Alt key, and while you're holding that down, you hit the Tab key. And if you just press it once, it takes you back to whatever your previous application was. Press it once again, it goes back. So it's a way to switch back and forth. But if you have a bunch of applications open and you hold down that Alt key and keep pressing Tab, it'll cycle through. And even better, you can actually take your mouse and click on any one that you want and go right to it. Like that. So that's a kind of a neat little Windows trick. One of many. All right, so the point of them doing it that way is instead of closing the browser, they wanted you to come back and hit the stop button to show you basically that in essence does the same thing. Not a big deal. All right, moving on to exercise number 2. So if you were doing screenshots, folks, should I demonstrate how to do a screenshot for this one? Would that be helpful for anybody? Okay, I'm going to take that as a no. Sometimes people struggle with that, so I show them. In the next step, we're going to add what we call the QUnit testing framework. And this is one of many testing frameworks, but it's one of the more popular ones. And the reason that we're using it is because it is a JavaScript-driven testing library. We're not going to analyze the code and what the tests actually do, but suffice it to say that basically what QUnit does is it simulates user input for an application and then allows you to test the results of it for your application without actually having to deploy the application or having the application completely built. So you can actually test portions of an application before it's deployed. This is a skill that's very much in demand out in the workplace right now. You will see job ads that will ask for TDD, test-driven development experience. And you know what? What you're doing in class here counts as experience. Even having touched it and knowing about it is really enough for some employers to say, well, at least you know what it is. I can teach you the rest. So always think about that. Don't ever walk into a job, folks, saying, well, I don't have any experience building web pages, really. No, except you were in school for 2 years and you built web pages in every class you took. I think that's experience. So don't sell yourself short. All right, exercise 2. Basically, open the project again if it's closed. All right, and then it says in Solution Explorer, this is step number 2, bottom of page 123. Add QUnit by right-clicking the Web Calculator node and adding a NuGet package. All right, so here's how we do that. I'm going to find the root of the website. So the one that's got the little planet Earth next to it. I'm going to give it a right click. I'm going to go to Manage NuGet Packages. Now, before I go ahead and click, I do want to point out, and this is new to me as well. So for those of you that have been in Visual Studio before, you notice that right below that option, there's a different package manager that's now built into Visual Studio. Wow. Okay, so I don't know if that indicates that at some point they're going to kill the NuGet package manager in favor of this new one, or they're just trying a different one to see how it catches on. But this is new. And from my little bit of experimentation, I've been finding that a lot of the stuff that you find in one, you can find in the other. So if somebody wants to be brave and experiment and try the other one, go for it and then report back to me on how it worked. I'm guessing most of you will probably not, though. So, all right, so go ahead and launch that. If you were launching this tool in a previous version of Visual Studio, you would find that it would not open up in a tab in the editor. It would actually come up as a pop-up that's a little bit smaller on the screen. So the look is a little bit different than it was in all the previous versions. Don't freak out. It's still basically the same tool, just a slightly different user interface over the top. All right, so what we need to do is we need to find the tool that they're talking about. So we're going to actually click on the Browse option up here at the top. And what that does is it shows us everything that's available to us. And in combination, what it does is it also looks online. In the older versions, and you're going to notice here in step number 2, it says click Manage NuGet Packages, choose Online, right? Because in the previous versions, you would have to actually tell it to look online. Otherwise, it would just look on your hard drive, and if you didn't have it, you'd think, okay, well, I can't get it. And that's not the case. Okay, so this newer version, basically the difference is it's searching the local stuff and the online stuff simultaneously, with also the combination that you can select here. But the default is to grab a package from online. That really is the best choice, folks, because why? The stuff is up to date. And you have more choices. Simple as that. All right, so we're going to come up here to the search box now. We're just going to start typing real slowly. I'm not going fast on purpose, because what I want it to do is do that search and start narrowing things down. Now we have to make the intelligent choice of which version we're going to pick. It's got to be the one that's in Chinese, right? Well, what if it is? Now, here's the question. Is the code inside of that file in English or Chinese? Yeah. You guys want to know a real advantage you guys have as programmers? You speak the language that everybody codes in. So you know, like people who speak like Arabic or Hindi or Mandarin or whatever their language is, and if it's a weird one that goes like right to left or top to bottom, you know, they actually have to learn some English before they can even learn how to code, because all the coding is still in English. That's kind of strange, right? So you guys have a distinct advantage in that regard. And thank God the Chinese didn't invent this stuff first, because then we'd all be learning Mandarin. All right, so now the question becomes, which one am I picking? Does it matter? It does tell us which one to pick, right? It says install QUnit for ASP.NET MVC. To me, that looks like this one. And that is the one you want to pick. So go ahead and select that. Do an install. Click OK. All right. And it's successfully installed. What did it actually do? Did you guys notice what happened in Solution Explorer? Yeah, it added a JavaScript library. Yes, you can actually look at it. A lot of code in there. In fact, it's probably several thousand lines, 1,000 lines or so. So a lot of little routines in there. But it also added a content folder where it has some CSS that's pre-built for the testing software. So in other words, you run the test, and then the look of the screens that come back are all determined by that CSS. All right, so it's always good to familiarize yourself with what gets added. All right, next step. They want us to add another JavaScript file, and we're going to do that in the scripts folder, of course. So we're going to right-click that, choose Add, and I'm just going to go straight to JavaScript file. This one should be called Tests, and they're naming it with a lowercase t. So tests.js. All right. And then they also want us to add an HTML page, and they just want to put this right in the root again. So I'm going to click the little planet with the node, the root of the project, right-click, add, and add an HTML page. This should be called calculator tests.html. Notice the title case being used, capital C, capital T, no spaces, and that's going right in the root of the project. So two things are happening here. We are creating a default page that has the actual calculator, the one that the users would use, and then we're creating a test version, so we're actually creating a separate page that's going to run the tests, right? Because if you're running JavaScript, you got to have a page to run it on. It can't just operate in thin air. All right, step number 5, page 123. Add markup in the head element that adds references to the QUnit CSS and the QUnit JS file and the calculator library JS file. And then I'm going to ask you, where the heck is that one? Is it already there? Yeah, we already made that one. So how do I do that? Well, let me show you a really fun and easy way to do it. Just drag and drop them in, and it creates the link for you. You want to type that out by hand? Be my guest. Not cheating, folks. This is the way of the modern world. It makes sure that you're not making a mistake. This is really the way to look at it. Yeah, there's something, a little bit more visceral about typing it in. But if you have a drag and drop and it's right there, and you got a mouse, do it. Save yourself that minute or two of time. Do I have all the references in here I need? I do. No, I'm missing one. What am I missing? I'm missing the CSS file, so let's go ahead and pull that one in too. Same technique, creates a different type of tag, but same concept. All right, next thing that we need to do, and I'm noticing here, and I'm pulling the book back over to the screen, does it matter, and this is really a good question, does it matter what order these files are listed? Yeah, kind of, it does. Yeah. Now, Brian, you're saying that with confidence, which sounds like you already did it, and it was maybe different, and you discovered that if you didn't put it first.
Just know that it's a good practice.
Okay, excellent. I love to hear it. Somebody's like learning something. Thank you. It is a good practice, folks, to put your CSS files first. And the reason for that is that way, whatever's being drawn on the page will receive a style before the JavaScript kicks in and sometimes overwrites that style, right? And what if that JavaScript is overwriting the style that hasn't even been put to the page yet? You see what the conundrum is? So there is a logic. Everything reads top down. So when this file loads, what's going to happen? The browser will read through, it'll read all this stuff, it'll get to this line, go, okay, let's go get that file, and then it reads in that whole file. Sometimes it'll execute code, sometimes it just reads it in. And then it goes to the next one, reads it all in, and it does all that work before the stuff in the body gets loaded on the page. And that's really important to know because sometimes you will write code in one JavaScript file that might conflict with another, and whatever happens last is the one that counts. It goes top down, first one in, last one is the one that actually does the work. So if you are redundant or conflicting, whatever is last goes first. So I am going to take that style sheet and I'm going to put it up at the top here because I know from experience that that's an issue. I also know from experience that the order of these JavaScript files matters too. And I don't know if you guys have run into that. For right now, I'm going to leave it alone, but just keep in the back of your head, if something's not working, we come back here and change the order of it. And there is a logic for it. Yes?
Do you, I've heard best practice usually with the scripts that with the closing lines that make
Ah. Well, it depends, right? That my favorite IT answer. It really does depend. There's issues. Knowing how a browser reads things in, sometimes we can leverage that to our advantage. So for example, sometimes we want the interface to draw on the screen first and then launch the JavaScript that will affect it. Okay. Sometimes we want the converse to happen. What really drives that? It's very situationally dependent. General rule of thumb is I like to put them at the top. Okay. But if I find that the JavaScript is going to change the user interface prior to the user using it, so maybe it's checking to see if you're logged in or something like that, then it might be pertinent to put it at the bottom. You'll get a lot of conflict from people telling you one way is better than the other, but it really depends on what you're doing. That's really the answer. So in some circumstances, you have to put it at the bottom because you don't want those scripts to launch until everything is on the page. And sometimes you do some at the top, sometimes way at the bottom, and other people will actually break it out of the HTML structure altogether and put it like below the closing HTML or intersperse it with the HTML depending on what the scripts are doing. Great question though. So you'll see it all of those ways. Which is best? Depends. All right, we do need to add some HTML to the body of the page also. So once again, I'm going to copy paste that in. So I'm going to copy this and paste it right into the body section. So you guys can grab that from the PDF version of the book or from the source code from the author. All right, so what we're really doing here is we're just building a really simple little structure that's going to hold the test results, right? So keep in mind that the page we're building is calculator tests, and then we're just putting in some basic HTML structures here. And this author does a lot of really weird things, like why on earth would you have an ordered list? So here's another one of these like rule-breaking things, right? Where's the rest of the list? Where's the list items? All right, what should be happening in your head? Because I know what happens, right? Because I've done it before. But what he's doing is he's building the structure so that if there's any mistakes or warnings or successes, the script is going to write the list items for us and put them in between those tags. Pretty cool, right? So what we're doing, and this is a trick that we use very often in this type of programming, because that's really what we're doing now is we're programming. We'll create a structure. And a lot of times, most typically you'll see it with like an empty div or something like that, where it has an ID, but it doesn't have any content. And then we do some scripts or we run some CSS or a combination of things. And then depending on what we do, it will programmatically select what content goes in between the tag. So we write like basically empty HTML and then all the script fill in the blanks. So if you click on one thing, it does one thing. If you click on something else, it does something else. If in this case, since we're running tests, it's either going to say everything worked or everything failed. And here's the actual error message. Like you really care, but maybe you do, right? If you're trying to make it work. All right, so that's the why for that. All right. Next thing that we're going to do, step number 7 now, bottom of page 124. It says copy the HTML markup that is in the default HTML file and insert it here. So basically, where this code is, that code's going to get replaced with all the stuff that we have on this page. So all this stuff that seemingly was sitting in midair, right? We're going to copy that, and then we're going to paste it into this spot. Now, the div that we created to hold it, conceptually now, we're telling this JavaScript library that the stuff inside here is the stuff we're testing. So yes, we're duplicating the stuff on our page, and we're inserting it into this test file because the tests will be applied to that code. All right, and if you look really carefully, just make sure everything matches up with the stuff listed in step number 7. And the author has this tendency of, like, once in a while, they'll give you some code and tell you where to put it. And then every few steps, they'll show you, like, this is what all of your code should look like now, which I think is pretty helpful. Because that way, if you put it in the wrong spot or you typed it in wrong, at least you have like a double check. All right, now moving on to step number 8. All right, and now we're going to right-click the calculator tests HTML file and choose Set as Start Page. Remember, all that's going to do is when we hit the play button up top, instead of launching default, it's now going to launch this page because we are in testing mode. All right, so it says the first thing that we're going to do is we are going to set our first test. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to take the code from the book, and there's a function that I'm going to show you in just a moment. But we're going to place it inside of this file here called tests. So click that file. You don't have to double click it. You can actually single click it so you can get into that mindset, folks. And then copy that code in, and then let's do a little bit of examination of the code. So here it is. All right, so the test function that we're about to trigger here is given a name, and then notice the second parameter at the top is just function without a name, right? This is what we call an anonymous function. We talked about that last time. This is a really common thing in situations like this. So what's going to happen is we're going to write a piece of code that gets a name, and then that piece of code, brute force, will just run this function. That's why we're not giving it a name, because we're just making it run. There's no reason to call it. We're forcing it to run. All right. So what's going to happen now is we are going to simulate user interaction with the application. So we're going to simulate pressing the number 5 button. That's what that code does. All right. Don't really need to internalize any more than that. I wouldn't test you on any of the specifics of any of this QUnit stuff. Whatever testing framework you end up using in a professional environment, you will get the parameters for it. You will probably get trained by people for it. You'll have all the stuff that you need to do the work. Here what we're doing is we're just exploring the concept. All right. Notice one thing that's happening though is that we are putting in a value, and then we're expecting as a result of that input to get something back, right? If you press the number 5, we're hoping that we get 5 entered into the calculator and not 6, right? So that would be pretty important to make sure it works that way. So we do actually have an expected value that we're going to test against. And that really, in a nutshell, folks, is kind of how this stuff works. We will throw tests at objects, put some values in, we're expecting something to happen, and we test to see if that expected result is what happened or not. Okay, so let's now jump over to the calculator library.js file. That's the top one over here in the scripts folder. And they want us to, reading step number 9, add a statement that declares the variable and an initialize function that can be called when each test is run, but will be called by the default HTML page. Now, if you looked at that instruction, and maybe you guys got stuck like this, you go, yeah, okay, how do I do that? Well, look at the next step. The book kind of works in that pattern. So the answer is in step number 10. So I don't know why they do it like that, but I know that feeling of complete, I don't know what the hell they're talking about, right? Well, this is what they're talking about, step number 10. So we're declaring a variable, and then we're also putting in an initialize function. And basically all that's doing is it's taking this command. Are you guys familiar with this command in JavaScript? All right, let's talk about it. All right, this is a really important command because it's basically the equivalent of a CSS selector. It allows us within our document to find any object with any particular ID and then address that object. But what we're doing is we're taking that whole statement that document.getElementById with the ID in it, and we're storing that structure inside of the very simple keyword text input. So every time I use text input, I'm in essence saying the highlighted portion. That saves me all the syntax of having to type that each time. See the strategy? And JavaScript programmers that are experienced will do this kind of stuff all the time just to simplify their syntax. Because JavaScript is so darn flexible, you can put anything into a variable almost. Any kind of structure, any kind of value, and it really is designed to make your life easier. All right. Now moving over back to the test.js file. At the very top of that file, little shortcut key, Control Home will get you right back to the top. Add a couple of lines, and then add this piece of code. All right. What this piece of code is going to do, and don't worry about memorizing this stuff, folks. Remember, we're just copy pasting and we're trying the tool, right? We're taking the car for a test ride. It is going to trigger that initialization function for us. And notice that it's got like a weird keyword there, module. And what that refers to is a structure within the test library that's pre-created for us. Syntax that was developed by them, not by us. Okay, so we're just utilizing it. It's just a tool in our toolbox. You know, if you want to know the specifics of it, the book does say the first parameter is the name of the module. The second parameter defines an object that has a setup property. Okay, great. Okay, thank you very much. Just in case you want to know. Now we are at page 126. Where was that first errata? 128, so we're not quite there? All right. If you haven't done so already, you can go ahead and hit your Save All button if you want. But just remember, anytime you hit that play button, it saves all your work anyhow. So if you're in the habit of like save and then run, you can skip that step, folks. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and launch this. And if you read the book, you know that this is what's going to happen here. It's going to fail, right? So you got a unique failure?
Yeah, it's a weak failure. No, I'm just failing. My thing is failing.
You're failing on a new level.
It says just completed in 450 seconds. Doesn't show any of that red stuff. And then on the console it says module is not defined.
Okay, we're going to have to look at your code. But let me finish off this step here, and then we'll come and take a look. In fact, I think what might be a great time to take a look at it is when we go on break, if you're okay waiting that long. All right, but what happened here, folks, you can see all this like beautiful output. This comes from the CSS file that we imported, and the content is generated partially by the QUnit library of JavaScript stuff. So what it does is it goes in and it checks the things we asked it to check. And this is reporting back to us, and you know it's not good because it's not green, basically, right? It's kind of a shade of red. And it says expected value 5, expected 5, result empty. Okay, so obviously that's not good, right? Well, I would think that 5 would be what we want. Say that again? Yeah, we could tell it we wanted 5, but this is the pattern of the book I was telling you guys about. First test will fail, they'll show you the fix, and then it'll work. All right, so let's move on to the next step, which is step number 13. The book does tell you why it failed, which might not be apparent here. It says, because no code has been added yet. Right? What code are they talking about? Well, we're going to find out in just a moment. All right. What we need to do is we put buttons on the page But we didn't tell the buttons what they're doing once they're pressed, did we? Putting something on the screen that people can interact with doesn't make it do something. You have to tell it what to do. So step number 13, we want to add a number click function to the calculator library.js file. So I'm going to close this and stop it if it doesn't by itself. Go to calculator library.js, and underneath the initialize function somewhere, you want to add this number click function. Now, when I start to add additional stuff to this JavaScript file, this is where you guys are going to see the efficiency of what we did up here. Notice that this simple little statement, every time we use txt input, it is telling us that we are in essence saying this, right? We talked about that. It's that phrase. Can you imagine having to add that entire phrase in each one of these spots, how long that code would get? So you see the strategy of it. And right now it seems like my computer is a little locked up. Hopefully it's just Visual Studio. And apparently it is. Just making sure my recording is not locked up. Oh no! I didn't do it, I swear. All right, well you guys watched my Visual Studio just crash. All right, and I'm glad I'm recording it, and let's see if it recovers. I'll be impressed if it does. Well, not quite. If it opened up my project and put me right back where I was without anything being deleted, I'd be happy. Hopefully nothing deleted. Oh gosh, where did I put this one? You know, I didn't pay any attention to where it went. All right. Yeah. So there I am breaking my own file management rules, right? I'll just like manage your files well. Yes, teacher. Now, if I paste this in and it crashes again, all right, I better hurry up and save it. Okay, we're good. All right, so the other thing I want to point your attention to here, folks, can anybody tell me what this is about and what this is about? Have you seen? Yeah. Ternary operator. Who actually knew that? Brian, you're earning an A for the day, I think. All right. And the reason I point this out is because the author in this spot could have used an if-else statement, right? And if you guys have not seen this syntax, I'm just going to use this as a scratch pad. Basically, the concept is so you have a statement that's being tested for true and false, right? So the equivalent to saying if, x is greater than 0 or something like that. Then you put in the question mark, and then if that statement is true, so you see how that works, right? So it's a really clean way to do an if-else statement. If, right, got to throw that in. If it's a really simple statement. So if you had like multiple statements that needed to occur in the true section or multiple statements that needed to occur in the false section, or you maybe had a really complicated statement that you were testing for true or false, you might not want to use this approach. But because so many of the things that we do in coding these days are really like, if x is greater than 0, then say echo hello, otherwise echo goodbye. We can use this shortcut approach. And what we're seeing now is JavaScript is one of the languages that I believe originated this approach, but you're seeing this approach now in most of the modern languages will have some version of this. Some books kind of gloss over it and don't even show it, Other books will show it quite a bit. This author just jumps right in and does it. And if you have never seen this before, had it explained to you, it's just a beautiful, simple way to do if-else that's convenient for simplistic things. But given the fact that all of this, and I'm highlighting this just so it becomes clear to you, that's really the if-else part of the statement. Why do we have an equal sign and something else on the other side? Because that's what's going to receive the result. So what's happening here is we're checking to see if the input value for that text box is 0. If it is, then that will become the inner text. So meaning that it will move into this value. Otherwise, this will move into the value along with the inner text. And, oops, not what I meant to do. So in other words, this is returning something in the process. We'll talk more about these constructs later, so don't get bedazzled by it. Go with it. In the initialize function, we're going to add some more code. So come up here, add some lines. And what we're going to do now is we're going to actually add an event listener. And an event listener is something that runs in the background in the browser. Your whole operating system is full of event listeners, right? That do what? It's sitting there running in a continuous loop waiting for you to do something, right? And that's what an event listener is here. What is it waiting for us to do? It's waiting for us to click on something. What is it waiting us to click on? Button number 5. So it's just sitting there waiting for the click on button number 5. Now this time, because we now have an event listener on the button, meaning that the button is waiting for a click, and then once we click, it'll hopefully send the value somewhere, right? You grab the value and send it. All right, so now if we run the test, if we go ahead and hit that play button, we should get this to pass. Crossing fingers, unless you get something like this. Did you guys get this? It only happens to the teacher, right? On even-numbered Tuesdays. So I'm going to just give up. Okay. Let's see. What are we doing wrong here? What did I not do? Everything is saved. So I'm trying to give you my problem-solving process. Yeah, that's a possibility, but is it launching the right file? Something's wrong here, clearly. Was that errata pointed to the right page? It was. All right. Let's see if we can figure it out. I must have missed a step, right? It's the only solution. Checking my code, so I'm stopping the browser. I'm going to go through each one of these files now. Yeah, let's check. I didn't adjust it, but let's make sure that calculator tests is set as the start page. It's not a big deal to right-click and do it again. I don't see anything in here that looks weird. I'm going to the test.js page. I don't see any errors or underlines. And what I mean by that is, if I'm missing something, Visual Studio should throw highlights and see what just happened. So I'm looking for things like that. You can close the NuGet window. Calculator library. All the sidebars are green. I don't see any underlines, so that must be okay. And default page, well, that's actually irrelevant because we're not actually working on that page at all, right? So where's the problem? I'm going to go to the errata. I'm sorry, but that's what I'm going to do. You guys keep telling me it's not for that step, right? Yeah, it's for step 20, isn't it? That might be something. All right, I'm going to run this again, and I'm going to see just what happens. It should give me the same result, right? What did I do? Folks, what did I do? Yeah. That's the only thing I changed, but I could swear that I had already said it. Right. Thank you very much. Susie caught it. Right. I did that change. Visual Studio crashed, and apparently that didn't save. Right? Well, try the trick that I just tried, and that is just do the right-click, set as start page on the calculator tests. I'm going to go ahead and stop the application, and I'm just looking ahead here. We just completed step number 15, and we are going to take a break for 5 minutes and come back and finish this off. All right, we're now going to move on to step number 16. And what we're going to do is we're going to kind of ramp up the work that we did here by adding a loop to our JavaScript code that's going to repeatedly run the test over a variety of things. So what we're going to have to do is we're going to be adjusting the button click test. So that would mean this test here, right? And if you read it really carefully, we're going to, okay, don't forget you added code to number click to remove leading zeros. Where did we do that? Did you guys catch us even doing that? Yeah, a few steps back. All right. Now, okay, go ahead and grab this code. And then I'm going to come back in here and I'm going to actually replace this, right? Paste that in. We're assuming their code is correct, so go ahead and do a Control S to save if you want to save what you just did. And I want you to just really quickly take a look at this code. And I'm not asking you to become a JavaScript master here by just reading code. But one mindset you should get into when you look at any code is try to figure out what it's doing and why it's doing it. And sometimes it takes a little bit of a leap, but that's why I'm here, is kind of to help you with this. So it says we're running a loop, starts at 0, and we're going to go from I until button quantity. What is the button quantity? How do I figure that out? Oh yeah, well we set that. How many buttons are there? 0 to 9, 10 buttons. Okay. So from 0 to 10, we increment by 1 each time. And we say here, variable button, document get element by ID, button plus I. Button plus I. Let me see. If I look at my calculator test or my regular HTML file, do you guys notice the IDs? Button 7, 8, 9. So they're all numbered. So what this code is actually doing is it's walking through each one of the buttons piece by piece. So we have a string, btn, and we add an I to it. And that's the button we're looking at. Isn't that clever? Otherwise, that button test that I wrote for button number 5, I'd have to write 10 of those to test each button. But with a loop, I can just, yeah, I can program it to do what I want. So that's what I'm doing. All right, carrying on. Go ahead and hit the run button again. Let's see what happens. And of course, we're expecting this, right? Yes, we are. We are expecting that these values are basically undefined or 0. Well, 5 worked because we already fixed that, right? But everything else is broken. All right. All right, so I'm on step number, let's see, step number 18. Is this where errata is, folks? Number 20. Okay. So we got a couple more to go. All right, go ahead and hit the stop button in Visual Studio. All right. So what they're doing here is they're making this loop. And notice it says, fix the failing test by adding looping code to the initialize function. Because what we did up in initialize, and that's in calculator library.js, is we put something in for button number 5, which is, guess what? Why it worked, right? Why that was the only one that worked, because that one was listening for the click. The other ones were not. So we're going to add the for loop in step 18 to the initialize function, which basically is going to be this same statement in a loop, but this time it will check for all of them and add an event listener using the loop to each button, right? Same statement, just alter the code a little bit, and it'll automatically loop through. So let's Control S to save that. Let's hit the run button. Uh-oh. This is what we call epic fail, right? Saving. I'm going to launch it this way. Is it going to work? It worked. I don't know why it does that, and I know that from your perspective, it probably seems kind of weird that it's buggy like that, and I don't like it. I'm going to tell you that right now. But it passed, which is what it's supposed to do, right? But not on the first try, which makes me wonder, is the process locked up in the browser or inside of Visual Studio or the web server software? And I'm not really quite sure which one it is, but one of those things is happening. So Control F5 and it worked. Okay. So in other words, if I had the everything failed screen and I did Control F5, it would then work? Okay. Well, that's good. As long as eventually some of them work. All right, step number 20, folks. All right, so now we're going to add test code to the test file. And what's going to happen now is we're going to add a test to test the or the addition button or the add test. So we're going to copy the code from step 20, and it does essentially the same thing that the above code does, but it tests a different button with a different type of result. It does not have the loop in it to loop through because we only have one add button, but it is giving us, notice, input value. So we're adding a 10 and we're adding a 20. What's the expected result? 30. It's pretty easy to figure out, I think. Do a Control S to save and hit the run button. And this time if I get fails, I'll do Control F5. Here it is, Control F5. All right. Oh, and I forgot the errata. What's the errata? I didn't hear that. The book is already fixed. All right, so apparently they fixed it in the aftermath, but it did say step 20 reads, and it should read, and now I'm comparing the code, and does it read what it should read? It is already fixed. Okay. So this must be like the second printing or something, or third printing. All right, moving on. And then I want you to notice, before I actually close that browser window, which I already closed, here it is, that what happened in this one? It says the button click test, all right, expected 30, the result was 20, there's a difference. And the book gives an explanation here, which is kind of interesting, and it says, press F5 to run the test and verify the test fails because you haven't subscribed to the event of button plus, right? What do they mean by that? See if you're paying attention. We added event listeners for the numbers, right? But not for the plus and minus buttons. So guess what we have to do? We're going to jump back over to that code now. I'm going to hit the stop button. May as well stop the execution here. And we're going to go to the calculator file. And then we're going to start to add some code. We're going to add another variable at the top. One is for result. And then I'm looking at the initialize function, and I already have my loop. And I'm noticing that some of the things are in a different order. Is that okay? Not necessarily. So I'm going to actually take this input statement here and move it down one, because that's what they have in the book. That's why I'm doing it that way. And then I also notice that they have a second statement that I'm about to grab and paste in, which is this one. And why is this relevant? Well, one box shows what the input is, right? So if you press a key on the calculator, it shows what key you pressed. And now the second text box is where the answer is going to go. So we have two separate boxes. So we need to basically set up an element to hold that. And then we need to add the subscription, or the event listener really is the better way to look at it. And where they're placing it is here. So I don't really see why they're placing it here. This is where they're placing it, so that's what we're doing. And yes, I'm putting it all on one line because I think it looks better. That's just me. There's another thing that we have to add too at the very bottom. And that is this method, which is going to allow us to actually do the math. So you see what it's doing is it's going to the result field, and it's going to the input field. So in one we have the result, and one we have the other, and what are we doing? We're just adding them together. But notice that it has a method wrapped around it called number. What do you suppose that does? It grabs the text from the text box because it's text. So even though it's a number visually, it's text in actuality. It converts it to a number so that we can do math. Control S to save. And now we should be able to hit play. And I'm seeing it now, Richard. Yes, I do. See, that's where the copy-paste comes to bite you. Thank you for catching it. Let's save that. Try it again. But you see how Chrome seems to kind of be maintaining that state of that one, all those failures. But this time it passed, which it's supposed to do. Now, if you can predict what the next step is going to be here, and you should start to see the author's pattern. We just did the plus button. We did all the numbers. What's left? Minus. Okay, so we're doing the minus button. All right, so we're going to add step 24. We're going to add that code to the test file. So this is step number 24, folks. I'm doing Control S to save. And the reason I'm doing that at this point is I'm starting to get so much JavaScript in here that I do the Control S to trigger that green bar on the side to make sure I don't have any syntax problems. It just gives me a peace of mind. That's the why. All right. Step number 25 is, guess what? Run the test without the event listener and get a fail. You know what I'm not going to do? That step. I'm starting to catch on to the pattern. All right. So now I'm going to the other file, and I'm going to make some additional adjustments. So I added one for plus. I'm going to add one for minus. So I'm going to copy that. I'm also going to condense this one down to one line, like that. And then we also need to add the function minus click. Saving it, run it again, and all will be good, right? Yay! All right, next thing we're going to do is we're going to start to test things like the clear button. So we're going to add another test. And I know I'm starting to accelerate the pace here, but I'm trying to get as much of this done before we go as possible. So I'm going to grab that code, and this code spans across 2 pages, 129 and 130. So when I paste it in, I'm kind of anticipating that it brings in the pages. See the page number? So you want to delete that. And make sure there's no other junk that came with. That looks okay. Guess what? The test will fail. Same thing. I'm skipping that. So I'm going to go right to the fix at this point. Step number 30. And they're adding one for the clear. You can kind of anticipate it at this point when you start to follow the pattern and you get what the author is doing. So save that one. And then we also need to add a function at the bottom for clear entry, which actually dictates what the button does. So when we hit clear, what does it do? It takes whatever's in the text box and it clears it. But notice that this is what? Clear entry. That would be the CE button, not the clear button. So it just clears what we put in last, not what's in the result. Okay. Control S to save. Hit the play button. Should pass. Okay, very good. Moving on to step number 32. And in this one, we're going to add the test for the regular clear button. That goes in the test file. So I'm adding that to the bottom. Control S to save. Watch the bar turn green. I could hit the button, watch it fail. But since the book tells me it's going to, I'm not doing that anymore. Of course, we're going to add another event listener for just the regular clear button. And I'm having problems copying from my PDF file here. There we go. And that's going to be right here at the bottom. Also condense that down. Save it. And it should pass. Oh. Ah, thank you. Except when you follow directions, you should follow all of them. Right? Is that your message here? So we didn't add the function for it, which is this. And then notice when you hit the regular clear button, it clears the last entry and the result. And that's how a regular calculator works, folks. Now, can I ask you a question? Why don't we have an equals button? Has anybody here ever done accounting? Or use an accountant's calculator? Did you ever look at an accountant's calculator? Never notice how they don't have an equal button, or if they have an equal button, it's actually the add button or the subtract button? There's actually a type of math that it's called postfix math is what it is. So in other words, every time you perform the operation, it performs the operation and gives you the result at the same time. That's how... Exactly. In fact, all adding machines, and this really comes from mechanical adding machines, are built that way. So that's why, like, whenever you would see like an old accountant's calculator, I'm talking way back to like when they had handles on them, even. Okay, dating myself, or they had like rolls of tape, so they could look back at their results. If you look at any of those types of calculators, in fact, you can still buy them that way, believe it or not. You'll see the plus and the equals are the same key, and that's like the big button. And then there might be like a minus equals as well. Kind of weird. But that's the kind of calculator we're building here. So if you ever hear that term, Postfix calculator, that's what that means. All right. Yeah, well, 10 key actually refers to like the grouping of keys because you have 0 through 9. And like, yeah, they can be called 10 keys. And then, like people like me, I still like to buy laptops that have 10 keys on them. Although most of them are getting so small now you can't. And that really comes from days from when we do a lot of math and a lot of spreadsheets. And all right, folks, step number 36. All right, so we're going back to the test file, and it actually has a listing of what all your code should look like. It says modify it and add the subtract test to assert that text input was reset to 0. So we had a subtract test here, and so what I'm looking for now is the expected value. So I'm looking at right where it bridges between page 131 and 132. So the first, and I want to pull this up on screen because I want to show you like that there is a difference here so you don't get confused. Notice that this expects 1, this expects 2. 10 and 20 are the same. All this other stuff looks the same. Expected is 10, but then they do another thing here and expected is 0. You notice that? So what we need to actually add is these last couple of lines here. And that goes into the subtract test. Does that help? Easy to miss. Do we need to do the same thing for add? Yep. Same couple of lines. And what was that to accommodate? Did anybody read the book? There's a reason for it. Right. So really what it's saying is that we're actually testing two things at the same time. What's going to happen? It's going to fail because we haven't added that code, once again, for the plus and minus button. So we're going to move on to step 38 and add those two things to the calculator file. And is that right? Because we already have those. Well, we're adjusting them. Okay, so Control Z. So I'm going to find plus and minus, and I'm just going to replace them. And what we're really adding here is clear entry. So this fixes the problem you're talking about. That way, every time you hit plus, it doesn't maintain the previous value and push it to minus 9. Okay, so that's the why. If we hit play, thank you for catching that. You're right, I didn't fix that, right? Because it's expecting 2 results, not 1. All right, so we're expecting 2, and that's for both of them. Right, we're expecting 2 results. Yeah, and we have to fix that, otherwise we will get all sorts of pink or red or whatever that color is. And now it passes. Okay. Back to the book. We're in the home stretch here, folks. Yeah, if we finish in a minute. But I'm looking and I'm seeing the light at the end of the tunnel here, so I want to press forward. Right? You guys need to pack up and go. Just, you won't hurt my feelings. Just pack up and go. But I'm in the middle of a record here, so I'm going to keep going. All right, so I am now moving on to step number 40. And in step number 40, I actually have a little note here in my PDF. And I don't know if this one's also an errata or not. Maybe somebody can confirm that for me. But I have a little note. It says, insert a call to the initialize function or stick a 0 between the quotes on the 2 previous. All right. So this is a spot where I'm going to make sure that you guys, did anybody get stuck in this spot? Nobody? Okay. I'm just going to go with the code the way that it is. And notice it says add a test to the top of the test file, and it should look like the following. So let's go back to the test file. And I'm still assuming that it's going to go below module. That's me. So that's where I'm going to put it. It does say that if we run it, it will fail. And then here we will actually add the initialize component. So go over to the calculator file. And I know I'm moving really quick at this point, folks, but you can go home and pause and rewind this if you need to, right? Or listen to my older videos if that helps. All right, so now we're looking for the functional differences between these two items here. What is different between these? There's only one thing I see that's different. Can you spot it? Between this little block of code and, yeah, the clear. Now, if I'm calling a clear function, do I have one? Oh, yeah, I do. So what does that mean? Does that mean it's loading up my event listeners for everything? That's what initialize does. It sets up the document get element by IDs truncated, and it clears the calculator just in case you're loading a web page now. And on a web page, sometimes we see that the cache sticks, and what was there before comes back up on the screen, so we're putting in a clear to clear out the entry, so we start at 0. That's the why there. All right. At this point, it says it should all pass, except we have this. How do we fix that? That's what my note was about. And what did my note say? This is where you read it. Insert a call to the initialize function, or stick a 0 between the quotes. Well, to my mind, it seems like I got a 0 between the quotes. Ah. So I can put a 0 here. Right, so what is that doing in essence? It's putting a 0 on the screen for the calculator. That's all it's doing. So let's save that. Let's give it another run, and this time it shall pass. Okay, that's good. Let's close that. I'm going to keep moving forward, folks. I want to finish this recording. So now we're on step 42. At the bottom of that initialize function, now add a call to clear the function. We already did that. Okay. 43 says it should pass. We've just passed, right? So we're good. 44, this is great. It's like we're a snowball rolling downhill going faster and faster, right? We're adding more code, getting larger, but we're moving quicker. All right. Open the default HTML file. Go back to that one. I'm going to move my PDF off screen here. And add a following inline script block to the bottom of the body element. Well, there's the thing we were talking about before, Brian, right? And when we say to the bottom of the body element, we're talking about just before the close of the page, basically. So I'm making a little space here, and then I'm putting that script right here. I'm going to save it, and then I am going to tab that in. I'm not sure why it didn't do that all on its own, but I'm doing it for it. All right. So now this is an example of like the difference between loading a script at the top of a page and loading a script at the bottom of the page. The functional difference here is we are adding an event listener to what? We're adding it to the whole window that's opening, so the whole browser tab really, and when it loads. So what are we going to trigger when it loads? Initialize. What's initialize? Initialize is a function that we have here. So the interface will load. All the other JavaScript stuff all loads up. The interface loads, and then we activate the event listener. Why? Because we don't want people clicking on the calculator buttons until they're all loaded, right? So they all get loaded, and they won't do anything until that script triggers at the bottom. Interface first, script triggers, and then it works. You don't want them pressing buttons when your scripts aren't there to make it do something. All right. Now we're going to switch this back over to the start page. So I'm going to right-click Default HTML, set as Start Page, and then we're going to go ahead and launch the application. And now we have a calculator, and if you want to zoom in, you can do some math like this and have it not work. All right, apparently I have a little bit of work to do. This is great, right? You get the last step and it doesn't work. It says try clicking the number buttons while observing the results. Okay, yeah, this is great. All right, so I have a little bit of debugging I'm going to do here. So I'm going to actually dismiss you guys. Anybody who wants to stay, I'm going to fix this and then finish the video. But those of you that need to go, you know, we're yeah, I think so. Okay. So now let's figure out the why it's not working. All right, so I'm going to go back through. Okay, so we have our script file here at the bottom. I have a suspicion. Does anybody have a thought as to why this isn't working? And see if your minds are thinking like mine. No, that's got to be read only. I'm taking it up to the head of the document here. Maybe missing anything?
Oh, you need
Now, the buttons are going to work if the scripts aren't connected, so I must have glossed over that step earlier. There's my zeros. Clear an entry. Well, let's clear an entry. Let's clear everything. Seems to work. All right, folks, that's the completion of Chapter 3. I hope you guys are successful with it. And in subsequent chapters, we're going to start styling this. And feel free to work ahead. And once again, I'm going to repeat for you guys here in class. Please read the chapter ahead of time. Watch the lecture videos from the earlier semesters, and we'll come back and just code. All right, see you next week.